In the last couple of classes, we've been looking at the command or the idea of not being unequally yoked. And this, of course, is mentioned in verse 14 of 2 Corinthians chapter 6. And so we've had some good discussions. I plan to kind of finish that up this morning and maybe move on depending on how much discussion we have with this. But I think it's been good for us to look at it and good for us to kind of hash some of these things out so that we properly understand what's being taught here. Last week we had a comment made, and I kind of brushed over it a little bit, and as the more I got to thinking about it, the more I thought maybe we might want to go ahead and take a look at it, and at the risk of kind of getting us off subject a little bit, I wanted to look at the question: well, is acting foolishly a sin? And the more I thought about it over the last couple of weeks, usually when we talk about things like being unequally yoked, this idea kind of comes up, and we often hear when we're discussing things like this, someone might say, well, it's not a sin, but it's unwise. And so what I want to look at for a little bit this morning is acting foolishly, is acting in an unwise manner. Is it a sin? Is it always a sin? Could it be a sin sometimes? And so I want to briefly look at that, because I think this concept is very important when we're looking at being unequally yoked, when we're looking at several things. We've talked about marrying non-Christians and things of that nature. And often, we hear it say, well, it's unwise, but it's not a sin. Is acting in an unwise manner, could it be a sin? Is acting foolishly a sin? And so to begin with, I want to look at Matthew chapter 7. Matthew chapter 7, and let's look at verses 20 through 23. And he said, what comes out of a man, that defiles a man. For from within, out of the heart of men proceed evil thoughts, adulteries, fornications, murders, thefts, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lewdness, an evil eye, blasphemy, pride, foolishness. All these evil things come from within and defile a man. And so here we have the word foolishness listed in this group of sins that are being condemned here, foolishness proceeding out of the heart of men. And so when we look at, what are we talking about here when he mentions foolishness? If you go to a dictionary such as Strong's, and that's where I go to very often, but I looked it up there, and Strong defines it as folly, senselessness, thoughtlessness, recklessness. And so here someone is acting thoughtless. They're reckless. It's senseless. And of course, we're talking about spiritual matters. Now, I'm not saying that, I'm not really talking about maybe you've got this dog that's barking at you in the pen, and you stick your hand in that pen and you get bit. I mean, that's foolish to stick your hand in a pen with a strange dog that's growling at you. I don't necessarily think we're talking about things like that. I think we're talking about spiritual foolishness in the context of what we're looking at here. And so this idea of acting in a way that is thoughtless towards your spiritual well-being. And there again, we're looking at maybe something like marrying a non-Christian. Because that is that's very reckless when we are looking at not only our spiritual well-being, but the spiritual well-being of our children. And if the Lord blesses us with children, all of those things is acting in a very reckless manner. And you look at this idea of foolishness being in company with all of these other things that are listed here, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lewdness. Right in line with that is foolishness. Foolishness is right in line with all of these other things that, even blasphemy, the sin of pride. And then there we have foolishness. And we need to remember what it says there in verse 23. All these evil things come from within and defile a man. All of these things that were just listed before come from within and defile a man. And so we need to make sure that we understand that. We need to make sure that we understand what Paul commanded the Ephesians there in Ephesians chapter 5, verses 15 through 17. Here he's telling them to walk circumspectly. He says, "See then that you walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time because the days are evil. Therefore do not be unwise, but understand what the will of the Lord is." And so this idea of walking circumspectly, if you look at what Vine says about this passage, he says circumspectly expresses accuracy, which is the outcome of carefulness. And so we're very careful with how we are walking. We're very careful with how we are placing our feet. And so therefore, because of this carefulness, the outcome of that is accuracy. We're getting to where we want to go. We're careful to make sure that we stay on the path. And so we're walking circumspectly. Also, when I think of this idea of walking circumspectly, what comes to mind maybe is walking through an area where there might be a snake. Oftentimes in my work, I'm walking through areas and I think this would be a good area for a snake to be hiding out. And so as I go through those areas, I'm walking circumspectly. I'm making sure when I place my foot on the ground that there's not a snake laying there or close to that. And so I'm being very careful with how I'm walking. I'm paying attention, and I'm not going to place my foot in an area that I'm not unsure about. And so as we go about looking at being unequally yoked, looking at different situations, we need to make sure that we're placing our feet, our spiritual feet, in areas that's not going to cause us issues later on. You look at Proverbs chapter 14 and verse 8. He says, "The wisdom of the prudent is to understand his way, but the folly of fools is deceit." So the wisdom of the prudent is to understand which way you're going, to understand the path you are walking, to not act in a reckless manner or foolishly, to walk circumspectly. That is the mark of wisdom. And of course, fools do otherwise. The follies of fools is deceit. And we could talk about, how fools are deceived in several different ways. But you go through the Bible and you look at how oftentimes the foolish or fools are connected with sin throughout Scripture, especially in Proverbs, but even in the New Testament, so many times you look at those who are foolish, those who are fools, they are connected with sins that are being committed. And so we need to understand that. And of course there in verse 18, he talks about, do not be unwise. Therefore, or verse 17, do not be unwise, but understand. Strong defines this as, without reason, senseless, foolish, stupid, without reflection or intelligence, acting rashly. So, is acting foolishly a sin? I believe these passages, as well as other passages that we could probably bring in to get a little more context, I believe that we can definitely say sometimes acting foolishly is sinful. There are things that we do that are foolish. And because we do those things, I think that at times we commit sin. Acting foolishly most definitely can be a sin. I think it was also stated something about how that, young people make foolish mistakes often as they're making their way. And I think young people are more likely to make foolish mistakes. But there again, you look at a young Christian, a new Christian, they're more likely to sin as well because they're not mature. But as we mature, we make these mistakes less often. We, as we mature as Christians, we should be sinning less often. Now, does that mean that we never sin? No. But it means as we mature, as we gain wisdom, that we are no longer making those foolish mistakes that we did when we were young. Since Artem's not in here, I'll kind of use him as an example. After we first adopted him, there he was 14, 15, 16 when we were kind of trying to shape him a little late in life. And we would talk about the way he reacted to different situations and things like that. And he would inevitably say, why am I always in the wrong? Why are you never wrong? It's just like, in these arguments, things like that, he's like, I'm always the wrong one. And, I would try to tell him, well, I'm in my mid-40s. I made foolish mistakes when I was younger, but it's my job, I shouldn't be making all those mistakes now. And I would also remind him that wasn't the case, that I had apologized for mistakes I had made in dealing with him. I did make mistakes. But when you look at someone who is in their mid-40s, who's been a Christian for several years, they should not be making the mistakes that a 14-year-old or 15-year-old are making. And that's natural. And so as we get older, we no longer make those mistakes as often. And therefore, we're in a better position to guide the young. And that's why the young need to be seeking advice from those who are older. And so, there are many paths that a Christian could take, which I believe would be considered foolish. Again, we spend a lot of time talking about marrying a non-Christian. I think that definitely is a foolish choice. We talk about, maybe taking a job in an area where there's not a faithful congregation. You have someone that has this job opportunity somewhere, and they take that job without even considering if there's a faithful group of people there. And so they put themselves into situations where they're going to be traveling maybe a long distance to worship God. And that's going to make it very easy to come up with excuses not to do so. Or maybe they say, well, we're going to start this new work. We're going to start a new work in this area, but yet they're not willing to devote the time because of the job. They're working so many hours, they're not really going to be able to devote the time that they need to start that new work. And so maybe things happen because of that foolish mistake to move into this area of the country where there is not a faithful congregation. I think that's acting very foolishly. You look at someone maybe who's taking a job that would make it difficult to meet obligations to their family. Maybe you have a husband that's agreed to take this job where he's going to have to spend an extended amount of time away from his family. Maybe he's going to have to travel and live somewhere during the work week and then only be home on the weekends. And he takes this job knowing that that's going to take him away from his family like that. I think that's a foolish choice if it can be helped. I know sometimes we get ourselves into situations where we maybe with no fault of our own, we might have to do something like that for a short amount of time. But yet, people, when they have something here good, they're doing all right, but yet they go and make a choice to do this. knowing the strain that that's going to put on your family, and you're really not going to be able to fulfill those obligations, I think that's a foolish choice to do that. You look at, these other decisions in businesses, or maybe starting a business, or, something just as simple as maybe I'm a recovering alcoholic, and so I don't need to be going into a bar to get a drink of water, do I? That's foolish to put ourselves in that situation. And that's a very simple example, but yet we don't need to be acting foolishly. And then, sometimes these choices that are wise spiritually are going to be considered foolish by the world. And of course, business decisions. If we could do something here that maybe we're kind of cheating somebody, or maybe it's a lie or something like that, that's really going to benefit us in a business sense, but yet that's foolish spiritually. People of the world will say, well, that's foolish, that's crazy not to do that. But yet we are walking circumspectly. We're making sure that we put our feet where they need to go, and therefore we're going to take the path that is wise for our spiritual well-being. And so I'd love to hear anyone else's thoughts on this. If you disagree with me or have something else that you want to bring up, I'd love to hear it from anyone. Yes, David.
Shane did a good job explaining all that. I guess just over the years when we've read this, and it's been studied, and talked a good bit about it at different times. But I guess I've always looked at the foolish part. Maybe I was wrong with that. Well, no, I think this would be right here, but maybe there is more to consider. But I've always looked at that at the foolishness of how we handle God's word and how we kind of present things. I mean, I guess I've looked at it from that one, that would be foolish, to go against what God's word said. Obviously would be sin, but I've never really looked at it totally as being sin always, just because, foolish, like you mentioned, is it simply to stick your hand in, a fence with a barking dog that might bite it. I don't know if it's sin, but it is foolish. It wouldn't be a good thing to do, but I don't know if we can say that was sin. But I think there probably would be situations that it would be, though, I think, So, I guess that's all I'll say right now, but.
Okay, Donnie.
In Ephesians 4, verse 27, stated just simply, nor give place to the devil. So when you have a candidate for marriage, and if the gospel is the guiding force in his life, and he's unmarried or she's unmarried, the principle of don't make an opportunity for the devil to have inroads into your life.
Yeah.
I mean, we need to do some preventative maintenance here.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And that's really, a lot of these things that I was talking about, what it does, it gives a place for the devil to come in, opens a door for him to come in. Yeah, that's a very good point. Jeremy.
The quote that you had up there earlier, and I think you hear a lot of people say something similar to that, that something may not be sin, but it's unwise.
Yeah.
I've always had a problem with that quote because I think that people have this idea that there's right and then there's wrong, and in the middle here's this is unwise.
Yeah.
Like there's this other category. But I think it's what you're saying. Like all the examples that you used are based on Bible principles, Bible commands. Like why would a person take a job somewhere where there's not a church? Well, because the command says that you have to assemble.
Yeah.
It's unwise to do that. It's wrong. It's sinful to do that. My point is, like Paul said to Timothy, and that from a child thou hast known the Holy Scriptures, which are able to make you wise unto salvation through faith, which is in Jesus Christ, or Christ Jesus. that if something's unwise, it's sinful because the Bible says it is. You know, like there's not this category of, I understand there's judgment calls that we make, but my judgment calls are to be based upon principles that we found in the Bible. Like it's not just, well, I think this or I think that. You know, in this situation, I think it's okay, or you know, I think it's wrong. Like everything that we do to walk circumspectly is based upon Bible principles, like Donnie said. You know, like that passage addresses the fact that you have to make a decision, that your decisions are to be made based upon the scriptures, not based upon what you think, you know, what this person thinks. And that's always been a problem for me because it's like a scapegoat for people. Like you can use, well, I think it's wise to do this, and this person says, I think it's unwise to do it. Well, what category is that? Like, where's that in the Bible? You know, you understand my point? Like, where is that category?
Yeah.
That a person can say, one person can over here can say it's wise, this person says it's unwise. Well, based on what? You know, based on what?
Yeah. I mean, you look at the passage that Donnie used, you know, their previous verses, be angry and do not sin, do not let the sun go down on your wrath, nor give place to the devil. You look at giving Satan a place in connection with our anger. Maybe we have trouble with our anger. You know, if that's the case, we might need to stay off of social media. It may not be wise for us to be on social media because we're opening that door, because if you stay on there very long, you're probably going to find something that's going to anger you. And so, you know, maybe we need to turn off cable news, things like that, and not open that door for Satan to enter there and give him a place. So it's all connected, like you said, with
that's a perfect example. You wouldn't do that because you know it's going to put you in a bad situation.
Yeah.
It obviously would be unwise. It'd be wrong for you to make that decision. For you to make that decision.
Yeah.
Because of your anger or your problem with your anger.
So I think we use that concept of it's unwise as an excuse to put ourselves, to open the door for Satan. Yeah, Rodney.
I just want to piggyback. I agree with everything you said. What I want to go back to is when we first opened this class, I made the statement to you, if I could show you that marrying marrying a non-Christian is unwise or is an unequal yoking, then that passage condemns it, right? And all I wanted to do is try to help shore up, this is mainly for our young people, this mixed language of unwise, you've cleared up, I think, in a lot of ways, and that's so helpful because it's wrong. You said, is it a sin? Well, it's unwise. Well, if it's unwise, then it's a sin.
Yeah.
And so, but that's why I believe this passage we're on, 2 Corinthians 6, see, without question condemns a Christian married a non-Christian. Problem people have is, how do you get out of it? But I think we've shown we're secure in that. We got a passage of God telling us don't get out of it. Yeah. So we don't need to use this come out from among them idea. I just wanted to comment on the guy that takes a job away from his family. That's an unequal yoking. See, he's tied himself to his, you see what I mean? The point is, all these things you're describing is 2 Corinthians 6. See, what part has a believer with an unbeliever? Paul raises that question, and there is none. You can't go take jobs with sinners trying to make a living to the degree that you abandon your spirit. You see, I just wanted to tie it together that really I believe without question that passage is speaking to Donnie's principle. It's speaking to everything you've said, because it just says don't get tied up with them like that. See, don't make them kind of irrational decisions.
A good point. Sense. Anyone else want to say anything?
Shane, just a little more on what I said earlier. You know, I don't want to leave the impression that I don't think being foolish is a sin. But I think it is. I don't know that when it's dealing with God's word, anything that would encompass God's word, going against what Jeremy said, Rodney said, Don said, things like that, I don't, yes, it is foolish. It would be a sin. But the world would call things that are good bad and bad good, just like they would say, well, that's foolish. Y'all assembling on Sunday, Lord's Day, it's foolish. No, God's word tells us what to do. So
Yeah.
that's where I'm coming from. There would be things that would be foolish, that would be a sin.
Yeah.
But in the scheme of things, just because it's foolish, might not always be a sin in other things, but in God's word, it would always be in my mind. So I want to be sure, I was clear on that. I think you understood that. I think most people did, that know, we know that, but felt like I need to kind of explain it.
Okay. And incidentally, we plan, I know Glenn had wanted to have a further study on marrying non-Christians and things like that. And Lord willing, Brandy and I plan to have a class at our home once Glenn gets back in town. And that way we can kind of discuss that. And, one reason is another reason is because we want the young people to be in there and to really try to instill in them why you need to be marrying faithful Christians. And I think there are several people in here that could attest, not several, but some in here that could speak to us about the difficulties and the struggles and things like that. And so, Lord willing, we will have that class once Glenn returns and talk about that a little bit more. And so let's get back to this or continue with this idea of being unequally yoked. As Rodney pointed out, it's all dealing with that. And there, verses 14 through 18, we won't take the time to read that since our time's getting short. But I wanted to go ahead and look at maybe what associations are being considered. We kind of dipped our toe into this part of it last time. And as we were closing out, there again, I had asked that everybody kind of think on these things. If you wanted to bring up something, very specific, situations that you've been in or you've seen others that would definitely say, yes, this is being unequally yoked. So we kind of know, giving us some examples, I think that would be good as well. And if you remember our picture here, we're trying to understand what's being considered, and it's the idea of yoking two animals together so that you've got this unequalness where one is being pulled in another direction, and where it's being very difficult, or it's very difficult to plow that straight row, as we say. And so we need to be plowing a straight row, stay on the straight and narrow. And so when you have this unequal yoking, then as we said, it's just as ridiculous as the picture that's behind me here of this camel and ox being yoked together. It's just, there's just not a way that that's really going to work at all very well and do what you need to do. And so we should not put ourselves in a relationship where we will be bound together with an unbeliever in a way that's going to pull us in the wrong direction. And so, this, as we said, would be, it would be, situations where maybe in business, it would be maybe yoking ourselves with someone maybe in a recreational type situation where we're being pulled away because we're always wanting to play this sport or travel with this sport or something like that, and we're not able to really focus on God like we should. But maybe I think a Christian, really doesn't have any business being a business partner with a non-Christian, because your sets of values are just too different. When it comes to taxes and things like that, the vast majority of businesses, I think, probably cheat on their taxes in some way or another. If they can get by with it, they will. And I think this is proven day after day with people, claiming things and things of that nature that they shouldn't, but yet they do so because they think, well, nobody's really going to know. And so a Christian in that situation, that's probably always going to be a battle with your business partner. Bill sent me a passage this morning, and I went ahead and included it. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 20 through 22. It says, rather, that the things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons and not to God. I do not want you to have fellowship with demons. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You cannot partake of the Lord's table and the table of demons. Or do we provoke the Lord to jealousy? Are we stronger than he? And so here again, it's kind of this same idea of, giving place to the devil, kind of taking it a step further. We're trying to partake of this over here, things that are evil, drinking of two different cups, and it just does not work. God is a jealous God. If we're drinking out of this evil cup, he's not going to have it. He's not going to accept it. And so this passage, I think, speaks to the concept of trying to straddle the fence and be on both sides. And so you're allowing whatever it is, whatever you're wanting to participate in, to try to pull you over on the other side of the fence. And so, as Christians, we want to stay as far back on the right side of the fence as we possibly can to know that we are safe. And of course, we understand, we talked about it a couple of weeks ago, how we can't come out of the world. We're going to have to interact with these people. But yet we need to do so in a way that's going to keep us safely on the right side of the fence and not try to pull us over on the other side.
Shane, we can see time and time again how God told the children of Israel from the very beginning of how if you'll follow me, obey my commandments, that my steadfast love will be with you always. Yeah. But they were pulled constantly by worshiping idols and even, marrying those that he said not to marry. Yeah. And how they were unequally yoked. They were pulled constantly. Yeah, I mean, all throughout the Old Testament, we see where the Jews were just constantly being pulled by these bad associations and these bad yokings. Our close, intimate companions should not be unbelievers. We should not be emotionally bound with these strong emotions to people who do not serve God. Throughout all the scriptures, both Old and New Testaments, God's children are told that their close, intimate companions should be fellow servants of God. And that's, exactly what Stephen was pointing out there, and how we can see the examples of, we can see what happened when the Israelites didn't follow those examples. And in this way, we are there to help and encourage each other. We support each other and help strengthen each other. You look at Proverbs chapter 27, verse 17, as iron sharpens iron, the man sharpens the countenance of his friend. And so we want to make a companion out of somebody that's going to sharpen us, not dull us. And so we want to be sharpening each other. We want to be holding each other accountable. We want to be challenging each other to grow spiritually, and therefore becoming sharper and not more dull. And that's what happens when we start interacting, in a close, intimate way with non-Christians. They, over time, begin to dull us. You look at Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verses 9 through 12. It says, 2 are better than 1 because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, one will lift up his companion, but woe to him who is alone when he falls, for he has no one to help him. Again, if 2 lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one be warm alone? Though one may be overpowered by another, 2 can withstand it, and a threefold cord is not quickly broken. And so here again, this idea, we've got the choice in our intimate companionships. Are we going to choose someone or a group of people that's going to make us stronger, where we will be like this threefold cord? Are we going to choose companions that will weaken us and will be no help to us in the times where we really need someone to support us? And yoking ourselves with unbelievers is going to cause us grief. You look at Proverbs chapter 13 and verse 20, it says, "He who walks with the wise men will be wise, but the companion of fools will be destroyed." If we want to be wise, associate yourself with wise people, with strong people. The other side to that coin is if we are companions of fools, these people who are acting foolishly, who are making foolish decisions, who are preaching a foolish gospel, false doctrine. The ultimate end of that is that we will be destroyed. Look at Proverbs chapter 25 and verse 26. It says, "A righteous man who falters before the wicked is like a murky spring and a polluted well." And so we need to make sure that our well doesn't become polluted, that our spring is not murky, because those people, that's what's going to happen. If we begin associating with all of these evil things closely, then our well is going to be polluted and our spring is going to become murky. And we can't allow that to happen. So we've got a couple of minutes. Does anyone have anything they would like to add? Any maybe specific instances of unequally yoked that maybe you've encountered, that you've seen? If so, feel free to speak up. I think this has been a very beneficial study. It's been a very beneficial study for me, and I appreciate all the comments and things like that. I think this is exactly what we're talking about when we look at the concept of iron sharpening iron, how that we can all discuss and challenge each other, and at the end of a study like this, I believe we are all better for it, and we are all sharper. Our spiritual swords are sharper because we've challenged each other with some of these concepts and have grown all as Christians. And so we'll go ahead and stop the study there. I don't think we'll have time to really get into the next part, but we'll pick back up, Lord willing, next week with verse 16 through 18 and look at, the fellowship with God that Paul is speaking about here. Kind of go back. He mentions some of how the Corinthians were failing to open themselves to him and ultimately to God. He goes back to that concept here in the first part of chapter 7. And so we'll look at that a little bit and then continue on there in chapter 7, Lord willing, next week. So I appreciate everyone's attention, your participation, and since we've got a little bit of time, I'd like to also mention that we plan, I think in a couple of weeks, Brother Reuben is going to be having a class at our home. I think, what did we say, the 2nd of September? That would be the first Friday night in September. And so if you'd like to go ahead and be making plans for that, we plan to have that. And then in October, Dylan is going to be presenting a class at our home as well. So we don't have the exact date on that one yet because Brandy and I plan to be out of town the first week. But anyway, be making plans for that. We hope that to get back into the swing of being able to be in each other's homes more, with the threat of COVID not being quite as threatening, I guess you could say, now. So I think it will be good for us to start back with things like that. As soon as he comes up with one. Do you have it yet? He's still pondering. So I told him I needed to know. That way we could go ahead and get the word out on that. So Dylan has got his. And what did you say, Dylan?
Looking at the significance of the phrase "come together" and all its implications.
Okay. So he'll be talking about come together. And so that'll be in October, Lord willing. So thank you.